Psalms 55 and 21. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Job 9 and 24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Call halal YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, QADASH. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders. Salutations to all my fellow laborers doing this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so now more so than ever. To the Akwaf that are listening and learning, and to the scattered elect that are scattered around the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird. This is your brother MALCHAAMAH from the branch of the Great Millstone here in Chicago. And without any further ado,
we have shooting after shooting after shooting in this country, and we talk about the Second Amendment, and I would like to have an uncomfortable moment with the Second Amendment. Maybe people in this room are familiar with this history. My jaws dropped when I read it. By the time the U.S. Constitution was ratified, hundreds of slave uprisings had occurred across the South, and in many areas, blacks outnumbered whites. The only way you keep a group of people who are more than the group of people you're in, the only way you keep them under control is by violence. It's with guns. State militias were used to both prevent and put down slave uprisings, and Sally Hayden, who wrote this book, says slavery can only exist in the context of a police state, and the enforcement of that police state was the explicit job of the state militias. This is what the state militias wore. And an uncomfortable truth is that modern-day police departments had, as part of their formation, the history of state militias. I'm not saying that modern-day police departments are slave catchers. There are other people who will say that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is part of our history, and ignoring it and pretending that it doesn't exist doesn't make sense, because one of the things I'm going to ask you to think about is how information gets passed down from generation to generation to generation so that people understand how they can live in the world. One of the things I want you to think about is from the early 1800s, that badge to black and brown people meant power, it meant violence, and it meant death. So go to the history about what the people said about the Second Amendment. And what you find, at least for me, was fascinating and somewhat frightening. This is George Mason from the Virginia Ratifying Convention. The militia may here be destroyed by that method which has been practiced in other parts of the world before. That is, by rendering them useless, by disarming them. Because under various pretenses, Congress may neglect to provide for arming and disciplining the militia. And the state governments cannot do it, for Congress has the exclusive right to arm them under this proposed Constitution. What he is saying is, if we don't change the way this part of the Constitution is being written, we in the South are not going to be able to maintain our state-based slave patrols. Militias and slave patrols were the same things in this part of our history. Patrick Henry, 1788. If the country is invaded, a state may go to war, but cannot suppress a slave insurrection under this new Constitution. If there should happen an insurrection of slaves, the country cannot be said to be invaded. They cannot, therefore, suppress it without the interposition of Congress, because Congress and only Congress under this new Constitution can call forth the militia. He is saying it as clearly as he can. Yeah, if the country gets attacked, we can have arms to defend ourselves. But if the slaves uprise, the country hasn't been attacked. And if Congress doesn't give us the guns to arm our militia or let us arm our militia, the slaves are coming for us. Patrick Henry told Madison In this situation, I see a great deal of property of the people of Virginia in jeopardy and their peace and tranquility gone. And James Madison, the very father of the Constitution, says, I was struck with surprise when I heard Patrick Henry express himself, alarmed with respect to the emancipation of slaves. There is no power to warrant it in that paper, the Constitution. If there be, I know it not. Because part of what Patrick Henry said is that we've seen what can happen. What if the United States gets attacked? And what if we need all the soldiers we can get? And what if we make the slaves soldiers? Then they're going to expect to get their freedom at the end of the war. And what's that going to do to us? The first draft of what is now the Second Amendment read like this. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country. Second Amendment uses basically that same language except for the security of a free state. That was so the South could keep the slave patrols. That is part of the uncomfortable history behind the Second Amendment. I'm not making it up. You can go read this yourself. So when people start talking about Second Amendment rights, I think it helps for us to understand the truth about our history and where that comes from. I want you to think about affirmative action differently, because when I say affirmative action, for most people in this room, including myself, until I started reading this stuff, I immediately thought, oh, we're talking about the 60s and the 70s, affirmative action for blacks, and that got rolled back when Ronald Reagan came in, and that's what affirmative action means. Affirmative action has been going on since the country was founded. It was just being given to white people. And at that point, it wasn't called affirmative action. It was called the government helping its citizens make the country stronger. Over 10 years, 100,000 adults and children are marched off of their native lands, and 15,000 of them die on the way. This was especially bad for the Choctaw. And by the way, this Indian Removal Act of 1830, you know who gave us this? Andrew Jackson. Why did all these people get moved? Because of that. And talking to Pete before, he made the point, and he's right. It wasn't just cotton. It was cotton and tobacco. Two of the crops that made America rich. You won't be able to read this. It's just an ad from the 1830s about Negroes for sale. And what I'd like you just to understand is the language that's used. Because the following Negroes, Eddie, Melvie, Henry, Mary, Betsy, Jane, Lucy, Silas, and Melvin, a boy, are going to be sold from 9 to 3. Terms of the sale, 10% on the purchase, in cash, or money in cash, and the balance on credit. And so it just talks about this like a normal transaction, because the people alive at this time saw nothing wrong with buying and selling other human beings. This is not the slavery that Bill O'Reilly talks about. This is not the slavery of, well, it was a bad thing, but it wasn't that bad. 1.5 million pounds of cotton a year by 1790. Can I see a show of hands? Anybody in this room who has ever held a ball of cotton in their hand without the twig, without the sticks on it? So talk to the people who have done that, because for the people who have done it, you know how much a ball of cotton weighs. How many of those do you think you have to get before you get to 1.75 million pounds of the stuff? By 1840, cotton was virtually 60% of all U.S. exports. The United States was getting rich on free labor. Maryland made it a crime to possess anti-slavery publications, 20 years in prison, just for having the publication. Oregon did it differently. They said slavery is illegal here. We're not going to have slavery. But if you're black and we find you in Oregon, we will either whip you or kill you. So that was their way of eliminating the problem. And of the first 12 presidents, only 2, John Adams and John Quincy Adams, didn't own other human beings. My point is that nobody had a problem with white supremacy in America. It was what the country was founded on, and nobody was ashamed of it.
Jeremiah 50:33. Thus saith Yahawah of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast. Isaiah 10:1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people. The widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. This is Colossians 3:25. And it reads, But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he have done, and there is no respect of persons. Galatians 6:7. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. James 2:13. For he shall have judgment without mercy, that have showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. Call halal YAHAWASHI BAHASHAM QADASH YAHAWAH. Shalom.